Welcome to your podcast, Leadership is Tricky, where we'll tackle various topics, challenges, and experiences as it relates to your investment in leadership. So, let's design success together. Now, your
Hey
hosts.
everyone, Erick Sits here with Leadership is Tricky, and we are back. And I have a very special guest near and dear to my heart, someone that I spent time with in my career. So it's COL Retired Drew Doolin. How you doing, Drew?
I'm doing good, Eric. Good to see you again.
Likewise. I know it's been a little while. We wanted to reconnect, and and if someone that's touched me in my career and my leadership journey, I thought it was great that we were able to make this happen. So what's going on your end?
Well, busy as always, as you would expect, but a good kind of busy.
Right.
Good kind of busy. I'm still fighting the good fight out there and staying in the game, trying to be as relevant as I can, and we're happy. The life and kids are grown and gone, and we continue on the journey. So it's things are good.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So COL Retired now, Drew Doolin. So he and I served at a joint assignment for the Joint IED, so Improvised Explosive Device Organization. And it was a very important mission to me to be in that organization because someone that went through the carnage of what an IED can cause during war, as well as I lost a family member to an IED, and we saw how that kind of threw the ripples throughout our family. So yeah, going there and being aligned to the mission, and then you being our chief of staff at the time, you kind of took me under your wing. Any conversations that we would have, because I was kind of young and immature at that time, you would put things in perspective and not let me rush to failure. So for that, I thank you.
It was great serving with, and I agree that was a great mission, a great organization at that time, and I was honored to be there. As you know, as a Marine active duty colonel at the time, there's been Marine active duty colonels there at Joint IED Defeat as the chief of staff before, and that was the desire of then the Army Lieutenant General J.D. Johnson, who was the commander, to have another Marine as the chief. And I was honored to work for him, one of the best leaders I ever worked for. We still remain friends in our retired life. He was an inspiration to me. So even at that very seasoned part of my career, very near my retirement of 30 years of active duty, I was still being mentored by a great leader, and still today I'm mentored by great leaders. So I don't think that ever ends. And so thank you for acknowledging our time together. I saw it as a partnership and a teammate situation, and it was really, really a great opportunity for both of us.
Yeah, it was my first time serving with in a joint environment with Marines too, because we had a great military deputy who was also a Marine colonel that had very low tolerance for us to stray away from the missions, right? And yeah, he had a great message. He always talked about we're all snowflakes, right? And we all have unique characteristics about us. And he had a way to help us focus on the why. So it was great serving with Marines. It was great serving under your tutelage and mentorship. So yeah, so what we'll do is we'll get you introduced to our audience. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you come from and what was your upbringing like, and then we'll get right into it.
Yeah, great. I'm originally from a really small farming town in north central Illinois. We weren't farmers, but we lived in this community that was a lot of farmers, about 2,600 people in that town, which hasn't grown significantly greater over these years. So I was just a normal kid that played sports and was a B student, in high school, not knowing where I wanted to go or what I wanted to do. But basically, I've kept those small town roots. I think I always tell friends I don't forget where I came from. Those are still my roots, and I still have one brother back there in a small farming town. So that was kind of the foundation, that Midwestern upbringing, the work ethic. My dad was a tree trimmer. He worked on the power lines in Illinois and kept the trees away from the power lines. And my mom was a hairdresser. She had her own little beauty shop in our house. So very humble roots. but great roots, great family, and I often say we didn't know we were poor. I mean, I didn't know that we didn't have any money, and it wasn't a thing. And I still maintain some good, strong friendships and relationships back from those days.
Yeah, it's crazy. Most folks that I've interviewed that have come from humble beginnings, they all say the same thing, right? It's our parents, because I came up poor as well, and our parents did a great job at just leading us through those times, those hard times. And as you get older, you start to see the sacrifices that they made for us, and how they really had to use everything in their bag to make sure that we we're productive members of society at the end of it, right? Not letting that hinder us. But yeah, so
Right.
you talked through a little bit about, and I saw you highlight that you were a B student in high school, but
Yeah.
what made you choose the Marine Corps?
I think I always, when people ask me that, I say I blame the Boy Scouts.
Okay.
Um, I was a Cub Scout and a Boy Scout. My dad was the den leader, and so I had that kind of upbringing of being in uniform and having goals, and you had to achieve certain badges and things like that. I also, my sister was married to a Marine, and that was my first exposure to what a Marine was. The physical fitness and how he looked in uniform and his demeanor and the way he carried himself and his commitment to his country. And that set a seed in me that didn't really germinate for quite a long time. I thought I was going to do something else. I thought I might be a policeman in Chicago. When I looked at that, wasn't really exactly sure what I wanted to do. It wasn't until college time that those recruiters would come on the college campuses, and there was a officer selection officer, a recruiter for officers, who I happened to see the Marine uniform and all the free stickers and kind of if you look around me in my office, the similar kind of accoutrements, right? And that intrigued me, so I talked to him. I was very open to talk to people, so I didn't have any particular interest in becoming a Marine officer at that time. I didn't believe, but started talking to him and found out that hey, they would take someone like me and send to officer candidate school, and I thought, wow, that sounds like a real opportunity. But I didn't do that right away. I graduated college. I worked for 3 or 4 years. And again, I ran into a Marine. I was working at a health club. I was a big fitness guy in those days. And to augment my income, I'd work at a health club and working out and personal trainer for people. And I met this gentleman who was a Vietnam era veteran Marine and got to know him pretty well. And as we talked, I said, yeah, I was kind of interested in maybe the officer program. And he said, yeah, you should do that. It'd be really great. Um, and I went down to the officer selection office in Chicago, downtown. I was 26 at the time, so a little bit older, 4 years out of college, and said, "Hey, I'm interested. What do we have to do to make this happen?" And I signed the papers a few days later and was off to the races. Now, at that time, I had a 3-year contract, and I thought that would be it. I'll just give this a shot. I'll be 29. Oh my gosh, I'll be so old when that ends. But um, it really intrigued me that I could do something different, break out of the somewhat of a rut that I was in post college, not really achieving the things that I had hoped to achieve. And I thought, well, this will be something that can break me away for a while. And if I don't like it, I can always go back and try to get some sort of other job. And as it turned out, I never left. So it had turned, those 3 years turned into 30, and subsequently my son became a Marine officer. My daughter is a Marine officer. So it became kind of ingrained in who we are as a family. And I married an Army brat. So she
Okay.
was familiar, having grown up around a military family, obviously with her father. So um, that's kind of how I got into it. I wouldn't say I fell into it, but I was kind of drawn to it, I think.
Yeah, so over 30 years, I know you've mentioned that several times, right? I mean, that's a long time. I mean, when you start off thinking, nah, I'm going to do 3, and you end up at 30, right?
Yeah.
The 30 years, I mean, now that, I'm getting older, right? I've realized 30 years goes by pretty quickly. However, there's different phases of your career that, you can kind of break it all up, right? So, Yeah, let's start at the beginning, right? Like your first, your first assignment or your first, leadership challenge. What was that? And then, what did you learn from that moment?
Oh, yeah, that's great. So the way the Marine Corps does it, and it's similar in the Army and the other services, I went to officer candidate school in that particular time frame, and then off to the basic school, which is 6 months of officer training, both at Quantico, Virginia, which is kind of the nucleus of all things for Marine officers. And you keep returning back for schools and that sort of thing. And I was fortunate enough, I was assigned the logistics MOS, occupational specialty, went to logistics school for 3 months, and then was sent to California and got my first platoon. So it was already day one in the operating forces. I had a platoon of 40 Marines to work with, and which was very exciting to me because I wanted to lead, I wanted to be a part of a team and to influence people to action. And so from the very beginning, the Marine Corps offered me those opportunities. And as when we talk, what you'll notice that, and this is not uncommon, the beauty of the military service is they continue to layer and layer responsibilities on top of you as you're successful. And you just grow every time you move into a new position, and the challenges become greater, but the rewards are greater. The risk is higher, but the rewards are higher. And so I started with 40 Marines and then ended my career at 2,500 in the regiment command. So um, I think that's what really was appealing to me, is I saw that there was an opportunity to continually grow and a lot of changes that would happen along the way, different types of jobs. Although I was a logistician, I got to work in the air wing, I got to work in the infantry, I got to work in the logistics support unit. So the variety was also important. So a couple of years changing positions and moving locations, traveling, growth opportunities were great. Your question on what did I learn in that early platoon? I learned that the most important thing for me that I got the most out of was relationships, was working with my Marines and sailors. That was what I was really driven to. And now, as I look back at it, and even what I do today, coaching C-suite leaders, it really comes down to people or processes or technology. Those are kind of the areas that most things can be binned into. I didn't realize that then. All I realized is I was having a great time doing a variety of great things with really interesting people. And of course, people from all over our walks of life, every race, every ethnic group, every economic, social economic background. It's really fascinating to me, and it kind of fit my personality. And although the Marine Corps is, one might think is very rigid and formal and structured and maybe aggressive, um, it probably is all of those things. But I found I could be myself.
Right.
I could just be me. And as long as you're successful, um, you're allowed to do it. So I learned early on that I was going to like this kind of environment where I was challenged every day. I had to work on the people problems, the issues, um, and it was always going to be something different every day. And that continued throughout my entire career.
Yeah, it's great that you touched on one of the key things that that you found early on is relationships. And
Mhm.
I talk about that a lot, not just on this podcast, but even in my professional capacity when I'm talking to folks. It's really about network and building those meaningful connections with people,
Mhm.
right? Because at the end of the day, the work is always going to be done. It's infinite. It'll always be there. There will be ghosts in the hallways after us, right? But in these times that we have today, it's really about building that meaningful connection with another individual, and as a leader
Mhm.
impacting their lives, because that translates to great work ethic. It translates to trust. It translates to them having empathy when you're down as well, right? Because
Right.
you have that connection. And it took me a while to get there, to really figure that out, because I took the different path, right? I was enlisted, and then I went all in on the government and made my way to the top, and did that. But no, it's great that you got that early on, because I'm pretty sure that helped you later on in other assignments.
Oh, for sure it did. Fortunately, too, I have to say, I was exposed to really good leaders early, And it set the tone of what I thought a good leader should be. Enlisted leaders. I was trained by enlisted Marines, right? I mean, that's the reality. And I had a really great gunnery sergeant who took me under his wing when I was the platoon commander. I never realized how important it was until I got a not so good staff NCO that I worked with. And I could see the difference because I'd seen good and I'd seen something that was less than that. And that's something I impart to everybody I talk to, was be listening and observing, and trust your gut on what's right and what's wrong, and always stay true to that. And that foundation was set early. And to your point, I did have to rely on those kinds of relationships when the times got really difficult. Combat environments and that sort of thing where things don't go great, because it doesn't always go well. It's not
Right.
always the parties and the dress uniform and the Marine Corps birthday celebrations and the promotions and medals and awards. Those are all great, and hang on your wall and the plaques and all of that. But the reality is that the very, very difficult times are the times that you really have an impact, and are probably the most meaningful for you individually as well. The toughest times are the ones that really forge the things that people write books about.
Yeah. Because we touched on early on, and kind of the good of that first assignment, but what was your most complex leadership challenge?
No doubt the most complex was battalion command. So I was a lieutenant colonel in Iraq for 2 tours. Brought the battalion out there and brought them home and went back again. That was the most complex. It was the most number of people. I had 1,100 Marines and sailors on my second deployment, and also the most dangerous. And when we lost Marines and several injured, and lost a good number of them as well. And so thankfully, the foundation that had been set for me from the beginning and then built upon to the point when I was a combat commander really set the stage to be able to get through those really, really difficult times. So maneuvering on the battlefield with a large organization against a complex enemy, um, and then the most tragic part of losing the people that work for you, that is the most difficult. And the times that I think most about, not being a colonel or being working at the White House and the things that I got to do along my career. I really spend most of my thoughts reflecting back on those times.
Right. And yeah, I mean, I think you hit on a good point too, right? I mean, a lot of times it's the glamorous things that people put out there, right? Of the accolades and the time that they had or whatever. But a lot of times we don't talk about the times in combat and those that we served alongside that we lost, and they never got to come home to their kids or their husband or wife or their family, right? The loved ones. And no, I'm glad that you reflected on that, and you still reflect on that, right? Because again, this is the business of people, especially when
Yeah.
you're leading young men and women, um, whether it's in the professional setting or even on the battlefield, right? Um, yeah. So yeah, you touched on another piece, right, which was as part of your career, the assignments that you had, being not just at the, platoon or battalion level, right, in within the military structure, but also at the executive level, working as a military aide to the Vice President of the United States, where, policy and things are, the politics are playing out, that will help the men and women in uniform. So how was that experience for you, and what'd you take away from that time?
Yeah, I didn't pursue that position. It wasn't something that I was looking to do. In fact, I had a grand plan of, I was a major at the time, coming out of a resident school in Quantico, Virginia, Command and Staff College, and I had already networked, so I believed, networked my way into a great position back in California, Southern California, an operations officer for a deploying unit. We are going on Navy ships and do great things. So I had greased those skids with my networking skills.
Yeah, you
Um,
thought you were going back to the
but
beach, huh?
I was going back to the beach in Southern California, which sounded
Right.
great to me. Um, However, my assignment officer had a different plan for me. And he said, well, I need to send you to headquarters Marine Corps. Then it was at the Navy Annex, which is no longer there, a building near the Pentagon. It's not there any longer, but so 60% of all field grade officers end up at headquarters Marine Corps or at the Pentagon. And I said, well, I don't want to be one of those guys. That doesn't interest me whatsoever. But that's funny because I actually served 3 tours of the Pentagon later. But at the time, I didn't want to do that. And he said, well, I'm going to have to send you there. But I do have, I know I get these openings every spring for high-level aide-de-camp positions. And we could put together a package. They have to full body picture and uniform and your last efficiency evaluations and all of this business. Then I said, well, I am the least politically correct cat that you'll ever meet. I wear like a drunken sailor on shore leave. No offense to my sailor friends. I am not politically correct. I'm kind of a smart aleck. That is not a great position for me to be in. I don't think anybody wants me to be their aide. And he said, well, I've got to do it. I've got to submit X number of packages. So I begrudgingly put together the package he required, and then they set off on a series of interviews. And the first interview I did was with the Chief of Naval Operations down in Norfolk. He was going to be moving to be the CNO in the Pentagon. A guy named Vern Clark, Admiral Clark. He was from Illinois, and he's a great guy, and was a great guy when I met him. And I thought, wow, he's an Illinois guy. I'm an Illinois guy. I suppose I could be a Navy admiral's aide, and I didn't get the job. So back into the hopper of potential aide positions. The next one was for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, which was an Army general named Shelton. I never even interviewed with him. They did a package review, and he selected an Army officer, and I never even interviewed. So now I'm 0 for 2, getting ready to move into my headquarters Marine Corps assignment. And at the last minute, the monitor that we call the monitor, this assignment officer said, I have one last interview for you. It's at the White House to be the military aide to the Vice President of the United States. And I said, oh, that's got to be a joke. But no, that's serious. They're going to interview 12 people from the different services, and they're going to pick 1 or 2. I said, well, that's just, well, if nothing else, I'll get to see the White House, so I'll get a tour. So we started those interviews on a Wednesday, and they whittled them down. Like they did a morning session, an afternoon session, and then repeated that. And by Friday, so 3 days into this, there was only like 3 of us left. And the Air Force aide at the time gave us a White House tour, walked us through the White House as kind of our send-off until they made their final decision. And as I was getting ready to leave the White House compound, he said, you're going to be the guy. You're going to be it. We're going to select you to be the vice presidential aide. And that time it was Vice President Gore and it was during the election in 2000. So that whole debacle of the hanging chads in Florida and all that. And so I hung out for like 3 months waiting for my clearance to get approved, and then moved into the White House right around election time, not knowing if I was going to be Joe Lieberman's aide or Dick Cheney's aide. And as it turned out, it was Vice President Cheney. So I had about 4 months with Al Gore, and then the remaining time was with Vice President Cheney. So it was really interesting. And again, how I felt about it, my takeaway was interesting is because of my roots being a small town farm kid, I would walk around, when no one was looking, and look around at the art. I went into the China room and looked at Abe Lincoln's China set, stuff that you would do when you're kind of starstruck in the White House and being around that executive level. And then 9/11 hit. So that changed the game. Up until that time, the vice president was working on energy policy and were we going to bring in hybrid vehicles, and all of that sort of thing was kind of the talk of everything. It was not a lot of other, high demand issues going on. And then 9/11 happened, and that set us off on a course of many, many months of being separating the president and vice president for the 25th Amendment, and traveling with cabinet secretaries, the whole designated survivor thing that they made TV shows of. We actually lived that. And I spent a lot of time with Vice President Cheney, just kind of one-on-one, talking to him like you would talk to your boss. I mean, he was my boss. So that was really fascinating to see, something as big as 9/11 and how we reacted to that as a nation. So that was kind of my takeaway, that whole experience.
Yeah, so that's kind of cool, and I want to pull the string on that a little bit. So could you see the shift in his leadership techniques or, leadership demeanor or things that just turned on moving from, peacetime prior to 9/11 to the day after? What were the big differences? And then if you could just share a little bit.
Sure. Yep. I noticed it in the president, for sure. President Bush, a very confident individual. From what little I didn't have a lot of interaction with him, they really separate the president and vice president staff pretty well. But I did notice that he always carried himself well with confidence. But I think I could tell that he was more resolved. Vice President Cheney is what you see. He is funny. You might not see the funny. I got to see the inner side. He's a quiet professional. He's very measured and is always like that. Whether he's fishing in Wyoming or whether he's in the White House, he's just a very measured individual. So I wouldn't say that I saw a big shift in his demeanor. It was always rock solid and consistent, which was also a lesson for me, though. He is not a very he's not a very radically up and down kind of emotional person. Just very measured, and that was really helpful to take to my future when things got really chaotic, and I saw that kind of measured presence can bring a calm to some very chaotic environments. And I would certainly would take a step back when my internal reaction would be like anyone's.
Right.
I would calm myself and try to be kind of the eye of the hurricane for what was going on. Try to be that calm center, and that takes a little bit of practice too, to be able to kind of settle into that. So I would say I didn't see a huge change in him. And that was the lesson. He was consistent and provided a very confident, calming environment for people around him. And I admired that a lot.
No, thanks for sharing that too. Because I've only met a few leaders that no matter what's happening, right, they're very steady in their approach. You wouldn't know if it was yesterday or today, right, that something happened, right? They're very steady. They're in their approach. And most recently it was General Donahue, who's the 18th Airborne Commander that kind of, was the first reactionary force for whether it was Israel or Ukraine. And just to be around him during that time, it was and another guy was General Andresiak, who's now the UCOM Chief of Staff, going through these things where their calming presence helps folks, right? Okay, he's not panicked, so I don't need to panic. So let me put some
Right.
more intellectual horsepower into solving the problem. And then you also want to be in the game with them, right? It's because you know that they're going to keep you calm. They're going to work through things strategically, and they're not going to be emotional about things. And
Right.
you're going to get the best result from the workforce in that manner. So now it was just interesting because anytime something happens, I always want to see both sides of that individual, and how they reacted to those situations. But um so, just moving a little further along. So, you mentioned your two tours in Iraq, and you mentioned you lost some individuals that you worked alongside of, that you cared for, that you had connections with, and I know you've been very vocal and very open about mental health and
Hmm.
what it means to you. So, what I wanted to do is give you the floor to kind of expand on why does that mean so much to you?
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. Interesting that a good portion of the latter part of my career was focused on healing after trauma, and PTSD, anxiety disorder kinds of things. During I had 2 deployments, as I mentioned, as a battalion commander. And in the first deployment, we had one of my engineer company vehicles got blown up by a suicide-borne vehicle, IED. So a gentleman in his vehicle came next to a 7-ton truck that my Marines were in and blew himself up. And obviously then it kind of blew fire and things on the engineer vehicle, and seriously injured and burned those 8 Marines that were from Peoria, Illinois, the reserve unit that attached to my battalion in combat. And that was horrific. But then in that particular instance, we didn't lose anyone. They hadn't died, although later a gentleman died from the effects of that. But that was really traumatic. And it kind of set the stage and was foundational for what happened in my next deployment, where within the first month of deployment, I lost my first Marine to a rollover accident. The Marine gunner in the turret, they were driving too fast on a convoy operation that rolled him over, and he was killed. And for many of my Marines who were 18 to 23 years old, they'd never been to a funeral. They hadn't lost a grandparent. Their parents were my age in some cases at that time. And leading him through that first loss and doing a memorial in Iraq. But then within a month, I lost 8 more. And that was traumatic for everyone. And my reaction to that was, I didn't anticipate it, how much it would affect me, how much sleep I would lose, anxiety over the issue and feeling out of control, and not understanding what that reaction really was or how to address it. And that began my journey of trying to understand mental health and crisis response to things that happen in your life. I later would, to try to heal myself, really is why I started talking about it. And you can Google me, there's stuff on NPR that I did at the time, because I was trying to heal myself with the help of a psychiatrist about how I was going to, continue on to be an effective person, leader, husband, father. And I started doing guest speaking roles to returning veterans when they come back from the war. The Navy in particular had a program. They'd do a long weekend where they'd bring the service member, excuse me, and their spouse and do a weekend seminar, and it'd be things like financial planning, stress relief, and I was the keynote on that. And I used that speech talking about my combat experience, how my family was affected by not only my reaction, but to Marines that were killed in combat coming back to the base where my family was and lived, and how my family had to see that every day and participate in those kinds of things. It began my kind of quest to understand it more and to advocate for better mental health upon returning from combat. And I did my master's thesis on a comparative analysis between the military services programs for mental health and how they were different, and what worked or what didn't seem to work. I probably did a 1.5 years of guest speaking on that sort of thing, which was a huge part of my own mental health and be able to continue on. And I know there's an Army 4-star, General Ham, came back and talked about his PTSD. And that was a really critical time because to speak about it, because it was happening right during the war in Iraq and Afghanistan as well. And senior leaders weren't ever, coming vocal with the fact that they also suffered from mental health issues based on combat, because it was, we consider it weak. There was a stigma to that, and maybe it was a weakness. And I was worried how my children would feel about me. Would they respect me anymore because I was suffering from this? And would my wife feel that I was a protector and a husband and father of value if I was having this kind of emotional reaction? So it was an important time to discover for myself, and also then to share it broadly to help other people to understand that it can happen to anyone, and that needs to be addressed and dealt with in healthy ways, not just drinking or alcohol, drugs, or uh, other behaviors that are bad for you, which are, often how people react to try to drown the pain and suffering and that sort of thing. So it really became an important topic for me, and still remains that way. And I speak about it when asked. I'm certainly don't shy away from the fact that I needed to seek help in that time. I think it made me a better leader. And frankly, my kids, their reaction to it when they listened to the NPR interviews or saw me guest speak or read my speeches and they were part of it, they were mentioned in them. Their respect for me actually grew. It was the opposite of what I thought would happen. Um, and so it validated the fact that we need to share. Again, we started the conversation talking about people. Um, the human factors of this are really important, and it doesn't matter if you're a big bad Marine or if you're an office worker, and after 9/11, if you suffered survivor guilt or all these things that are wrapped around it. It needs to be addressed, and we
Right.
need to normalize it and get rid of that stigma so people don't. I mean, what is it? The suicides per day is ridiculous because folks don't seek help or they don't feel validated in their feelings. So um, it is a complicated issue, but one that we need to talk about more often and more freely, so that we all can, move along and be productive society members and friends and neighbors.
Yeah, one, thank you for sharing and being vulnerable and pushing that out there, and also thank you for advocating for others to go out and seek help and talk about it, because I don't think that we talk enough. We
Mm-hmm.
talk about a lot of things, but those tough topics, I don't think that we as a society we talk enough about the things that are ailing us, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
they think we might be judged, or they think, and that stigma is just out there, right? Of looking weak or looking like you don't have your stuff together. But
Right.
and I said this on a previous episode, my family, we went through a tough time with mental health issues within my immediate family here, and I didn't understand it. And what it took for me to do is talk to others and get educated to help lead my family through this tough time. And my wife and I
Right.
just talked about it yesterday, in fact, and we were talking about that time. It was just a dark time, and it took us to bring other people into the conversation to help us through that, and we're better for it. So um, and for those that are listening, I will post the NPR interview. I did listen to it, so that way you guys have access to that, and what Drew had pushed out to the world. So, um, you mentioned your kids a couple times, right? And you started with your both your kids are Marines. They're off living their lives, and you've got
Mm-hmm.
30 plus years of experience to impart on them. And I just wanted to get your perspective, because I have two children as well. But how much is giving too much, and how are you helping them through their lives right now and leading through their careers? Are they receptive, or are you having to find different techniques to help guide them through it?
Now they're receptive. I have four. My wife and I have four. Um, my oldest daughter is getting married next weekend in Cancun on a destination wedding, so we're
Nice.
getting ready for that. She's a nurse, exceptional nurse, and found her calling. And my son was the second born. He's a firefighter in Virginia. He was a Marine officer. My third is a daughter. She's married in Austin, Texas, and is doing great. She was a school teacher and now is leading a team of customer service folks for a big pharmaceutical company. Um, and our youngest is a first lieutenant Marine in Okinawa, a logistician in her own right, and is actually serving in the battalion I served in when I was a young major. So
Really cool.
we've
Yeah.
got, yeah, full circle. We went and visited her in the spring of this year and spent some time with her on Okinawa. It was really great. Yeah, the kids are very receptive to my wife and I's assistance when they ask for it, and they do ask for it. They ask for opinions on, hey, we're thinking about buying a house. What do you think about that? And what about this interest rate? My daughter and her husband bought a house in Austin a year or so ago. Um, we just had a call with my son, and his girlfriend, talking about her career opportunities and what we thought and how we could help her think through the challenges. So there's a lot of conversation, and we're blessed by that. A couple of things that my wife and I take away. We're really happy that our four children get along together so well, and they have a great relationship, because we won't be here forever. And the fact that they're close is really heartwarming to us. Um, we're definitely involved, but hopefully not too much in what they do. We're here. We're both kind of opinionated people, my wife and I, so we do share our opinions freely. But they grew up in that environment, so they're comfortable with it, and they also know when they can just turn their phone off, or I'll say that's
Right.
so. Um, yeah, it's been great watching them grow up as adults. Our youngest is 24, so um, it it's wonderful to see them, and be more friendly with them now. We're still mom and dad, obviously, but we like who they are as people, as adults, and really proud of what they're doing. So that's easily the most important thing that my wife and I have done. It's not my Marine Corps career, and it's maintaining the family, bringing up these children, supporting them still, and watching them grow. So that's really, we've really made it. In our mind, that's the measure of success, not how much is in your bank account, or the plaques on the wall, or the positions that you hold, or the title that you have, because all of those things go away.
Right.
But the legacy for you and your wife, are your children, and how they can give back to society, and ours are doing that, and we're really pleased with it.
No, it's awesome, and the common theme for all of your kids and the different paths they've taken, it's really all service, right? Serving their communities, and
Right.
I think you were able to impart that, you and your wife, on them, and that's awesome to see. So, again, thank you to your family as well for continue to serve our country, and then school teacher and all of that, serving those coming up behind us. So
Yeah.
very awesome. Yeah, so we're coming up on time here, and what I'd like to do is, what I could do with every other guest, right? So think of young Drew Doolin,
Mhm.
and 30 plus years of experiences in leadership and different positions, and what would be one thing you would leave these young professionals or young folks coming up behind us as a golden nugget that you've learned?
I think, and I'm sure it's said by so many, but I really think you have to follow your gut. I think your instincts are good, and sometimes we have self doubt on what we feel is right. You can't always just lead with your heart, because that may not be the best decision. But oftentimes, when I'm conflicted, even at this point in my career, in my life, um, what the collective experiences and the pattern recognition that I've developed always goes back to my gut instinct on what I thought was the right thing to do, and doing the right thing. And the one nugget I'd pass along, something I mention a lot to folks when they talk to me about what are the leadership competencies that are the most important, what are the principles that you live by that help. Um, the number one for me is integrity. And that's the only thing they can't take from you. It's the thing you give away. It's your integrity, your truthfulness, your honesty. They can't take that. You can lose your money, you can lose your job, you can lose everything you have, but your integrity is something you throw away, and it never can be really fully brought back. So I think being honest and having integrity in everything you do is the most important, and sometimes can also be challenging, because those moral courage decisions sometimes can have a negative consequence at the moment. But that's the one thing, if anything I could leave them with, is that's the most important thing. And if that's the thing I would want people to remember about me, that I was always honest about everything. There was no wavering of my honesty, or my integrity, and that's enough for me.
No, I think that should be enough for everybody. I mean, honesty, you have empathy and all those other things that go with it, but living your true north and being looked at as someone that's just honest and transparent, and you can get behind that no matter what your beliefs, or as long as those values align, right? So
Exactly.
yeah, that's how I know you, right? It took a while to get that thick skin, right? But um I've appreciated the honesty over the years, and I've appreciated our time here together. I really want to thank you for one coming on. I'm glad we made this happen. I want to thank you for, again, all of the mentorship, your many years of service, for your vulnerability and transparency on this episode to talk about your own mental health challenges and what you want to impart in the world, and everything that you and your family are doing for this nation. I just want to say thank you.
Well, thanks, Eric. Great to see you again. We've been blessed, and we've never forgotten that. I will also say we've lived every moment as fully as we can. You don't know how many you're going to get,
Right.
and we have always felt like we should live in the moment and really be thankful and live a life of gratitude. And we continue to do that. And so they're great experiences for me too. I get something out of every human connection. I learned something from the good ones, the bad ones. And so great to see you again. I'm so happy that you're doing so well. It's great to circle back to folks that I got to work with years ago and see them do well. So thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
No problem. All right, everyone. So for those of you that are first-time listeners, thank you for tuning in to Leadership is Tricky. For those return listeners, I appreciate your audienceship. And then for those that are watching us right now on YouTube, you can also catch all of our previous seasons, season 1 through 4, on all their major podcast platforms, Apple Podcast, Spotify, however you get your podcast, you can get to Leadership is Tricky. If you have any comments, questions, please leave them in the comment section below. Please subscribe, or you can send me a note at Erick, ERICK, at leadershipistricky.com.